right, good afternoon. Welcome to today's Planning Commission meeting. We'll get started with our first case here in just a moment. Before we do, commissioners, any potential conflicts of interest for today's case? Hearing none, we can get started with the case before us, a zoning ordinance text amendment for the billboard exchange program. Are we going to pass it straight to Suzanne, or did you want to introduce it?
I think we can just pass it to Suzanne.
All right.
I guess I'll note that we did have a presentation on the same item at your last Planning Commission meeting in hopes that it provided you with a little bit of background and understanding of the direction of the proposed amendments so that when you did receive your packet, you felt maybe a little bit more prepared with how the pretty significant policy shift and how we'd approach billboards in the city of Grand Rapids. Elizabeth, are there resolutions?
There's one in our,
Oh, there is one in the packet?
yeah. Just have to find
You know what?
Page
Maybe
72.
there are not hard copies, but they are it is in the,
it. It's page 72 of the.
Okay.
I can go print some out though.
I don't think we need that.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yep.
Hello, Planning Commission. First, I want to apologize for being the only item on the agenda and making you show up for signs. I know
I
it's
think you were the
everybody's
only two
favorite
items
topic.
last time, too.
I'm sure there was no complaints at lunch about this. We reviewed some of the history of the Billboard Exchange Program and text, and in this presentation I have information based on your questions last time in a little bit more detail. So I'll go through this quickly, but just a brief history, just a reminder. The city has for a long time had issues with billboards being in the way of development, and that's how we came up with the idea of the Billboard Exchange Program in 2009. We had about 326 sign faces then and almost 200 structures. And we had development projects that wanted to happen. I think of, for example, the Lake Michigan Credit Union up on Michigan Avenue or Michigan Street wanted to locate, and there was a billboard there. So the overall goal of the program was to reduce the billboard numbers, being able to move them. But then we also wanted to recognize the value of the boards to the industry. And so when it was devised, it was to allow for upgrades of billboard assets in other locations. So kind of a swap in some cases, and then allow for the development to happen. So we did this with the use of credits, and I'll go into that in just a second. But as a result of the Billboard Exchange Program, 25 billboard structures have been removed, and 45 faces have been taken down in that time. You can see in the chart how it initially right away was a big success, and we were able to get some assets moved, and then over the past 8 years or so, it's been pretty flat. There hasn't been a lot to move around. The industry, has kind of, they got rid of the billboards that they wanted to be able to get rid of. That maybe there was a duplication, or it was too close to something, or it just wasn't a great location for that asset. So they moved them. The request had been, one of your questions was, where are these billboards? So this map is new to this presentation, and you can see the general locations. Also on the left, you see kind of where those billboard structures are oriented around, with, of course, 131 being the most common, followed by 28th Street and 196. And then you have on our major streets, if you think about Leonard, Burton, Wealthy, Division, Alpine, and Eastern, that's where they're located as well. we think about by zone district and where we've seen some changes, there's a difference on this TOD. I think we absorbed a TOD in the CC, so I'd really put those two together. But the TBA has really been where we've had the biggest challenge, and you can see how that pie has shrunk a little bit. And really about 3/4 of those billboards are located in our mixed-use commercial zone districts. And these are examples, so Plainfield and Quimby, finally seeing some movement on that site, but you've got the billboard that was located there, and that took quite a bit of time to kind of work through. Boston Square has projects that they'd like to move forward on. We do have examples with Harrison Park, when Dwelling Place redid that project on Alpine. The challenge there, though, is kind of how do we want to handle moving billboards and understanding that there's a lease in place, there's a business there, being the billboard business, but then we have a property owner looking to do redevelopment. And in this case, the Planning Commission actually had to give there was a formal land use approval to allow that sign to be there. Which has become a kind of an awkward, clunky way to deal with it. Does it go to the Board of Zoning Appeals? Does it go to Planning Commission as part of Plan Sign Program? So trying to figure out kind of what's the right way to deal with this and understand the flexibility and the economic pieces to this too. So there's two components. One is based on the existing billboard exchange program that's there today. And then also looking at doing a repositioning exchange program that allows for some adjustments in the mixed-use commercial zone districts. Whenever a billboard is being turned in or exchanged, they get a point value to it. So it's based on the sign size. So a poster is the smaller billboard that you see. A bulletin is the larger one. And they get certain credits currently, the one for a poster or 2 for a bulletin if they're turning it in. And the repositioning exchange is new on the right-hand side where the square footage is equal for equal. And so this is what the current program is in place, except for the digital billboard face. But all of the other ones have been in place since 2009. So a new support structure, height increase, relocation on the same lot, additional bulletin sign face if they have a structure already in place. Let's say it's one-sided, then they want to put a second side on that structure. So those points all count towards other things. And with the repositioning exchange, the way those credits would be applied, I mentioned equal for equal. And in some cases, there's distinctions between the zone districts on where that would be allowed. Which I'll get into later, but just kind of showing you where these credits go and how they're used. So the first one, the upgrade zone, is along 196, 96, and 131. And so this one credit, this piece here, this digital billboard face is the new addition. And the proposed language would allow up to 10 digital billboards, but requiring them to be located in kind of specific directions and on specific roads. So on 196 or 96, they could have 2 digital signs facing east, 2 facing west. On 131, they could have no more than 3 signs facing north and 3 signs facing south. And to be able to do that, they would need to turn in 2 sign faces to be able to get to a digital sign. And in a number of cases, they have to replace the existing sign structure that is there. So that sign structure replacement's already been in place. So on that table, it was 3 sign faces or 3 credits to be able to remove or to put in a new sign structure. So for example, if you'll remember, the bulletin is worth 2 points, a poster is worth 1. So if I had 3 posters, I could get a new structure, and I would need another 2 to be able to do a digital board. If I was doing, or I could do 1 bulletin and 1 poster to be able to get to that new sign structure. So it's kind of a combination of the 2. They do have, in some cases, structures that can support digital, so it doesn't apply to every single structure. But I did ask out front to go through and look, and they calculated that they would require a minimum of 22 credits if all 10 locations were to be used. And that's assuming if there's a voluntary partnership with the city to be able for the city to do advertising on those signs. If that's not in place, you're looking at a minimum of 32 credits would be needed to be able to do those 10 signs. The agreement with the city that I mentioned, that they could get a credit if they allowed, and the city commission approved an agreement with the digital billboard, for the digital billboards to provide emergency messaging, safety initiatives, outreach opportunities, or other benefits that the city might think would be worthwhile. Are there any questions on kind of the logic or how this would work for the digital billboard faces? No? Okay. So you had questions. So one of the questions was, what does state law and MDOT require? It's only permitted in business areas. So for example, if you look out by Butterworth landfill, that's not zoned commercial. So none of those billboards would be eligible to become digital because it doesn't meet state requirements. They has a minimum spacing requirement of 1,750 feet between digital boards where they're facing in the same direction. You can't move, flash, very similar to the regulations that you currently have for electronic message centers. They have to be static. They can't have animation on them. They're allowed for one change per 8 seconds. In the language that's proposed in the zoning ordinance, it says instantaneous. So it's just, it's not like taking its time to come on the screen. It's like instant to be able to do that change. And the state sets the maximum brightness level and how that's measured. So that is all regulated. And then if there's any failure on the part of the sign, it has to go straight to static display.
On the one change per 8 seconds allowed, that matches then what's being proposed for the text amendment here?
It does.
Okay. Maybe you're not the one to answer this, but do you anticipate we'll have any pushback from existing electronic message center sign holders about the ability for the copy to change more often than once, every few minutes? Minute or something?
You certainly could. I think there's an argument to be made that this is a different type of, different scale, different location, different, it's.
Fewer?
Yeah.
Okay.
But, and the speed of traffic is also moving faster, so the timing is sort of based on how fast you're driving past it. So if you're doing every 8 seconds on a neighborhood business district and you're walking through there, it would appear to be flashing.
Okay.
Whereas if you're driving and going 70 miles per hour past the sign, that's a different perception of scale and speed than in a neighborhood business district. So I think I could hear them asking for that, but I think there are some differences.
Okay.
Related to the distance, the minimum spacing between, and I apologize if it is in the ordinance and I just missed it, but did we or do we have minimum distance requirements for the current, like when those billboards were installed, like what, the regular old billboards? So like, it seems like in looking at the map, like there are a lot of billboards currently that are not that minimum distance apart related to the digital, but I didn't know if there was.
There are existing billboards that are non-conforming because of the separation distance. So right now, you have to double check, I think it's 3,000 feet is the distance currently between boards.
Okay.
So that's, so basically, we're completely tapped out as far as billboard locations in the city. Because all the possible billboard locations that could be there that would meet the current spacing requirements in the zoning ordinance they've installed them if they could install them.
Okay, thanks.
One of the questions was, are there adequate review standards? So before a billboard upgrade is even done, billboard companies will go to the state to make sure they can even get it permitted, or else they're not even working with the city. We also included in the ordinance that a study shall be prepared to demonstrate the digital billboard's view shed for consideration by the planning director or planning commission, depending on proximity to residential uses. So, again, kind of that's that expectation of we want to truly understand what the potential light impacts and viewing impacts could be for this sign would fall underneath that. This language that's proposed in the ordinance aligns with both state law, but then what other communities in the region have done, and that I think our experience with electronic message centers, provides that perspective now that those have been around for a while on how we want to think about the scope and scale of them. Again, it's 10 boards out of almost 300. And then and then the question is kind of the approval process that you want to use for that, which I'll mention in a minute. The question was impact on residential uses. So we did take the opportunity, I had reviewed them before, actually Julie in my office had gone through all potential digital billboard locations and proximity to residential. We shared that information with Kristen yesterday and talked through that. She reviewed all the potential locations where they would be requested. Because it's viewed as proprietary, and it's not yet something, there is another billboard company, Lamar, that's there, that Outfront owns the 90% of the billboards in town. And so as we're working through this, it was, most of all of those boards are there. So when we met to talk about them, Kristen was able to see that, but they didn't want it to become public knowledge, which is why it's not provided in your packets. The logic when we look at that circle, that's a 250-foot distance from the furthest area of that circle to the face of the sign. It can't exceed beyond that 0.3 for the light level. According to MDOT regulations, state law, they can't exceed that once they get to that edge. So they have to be careful on how they shield it and how that works. It's almost a louver system, both vertically and horizontally on the billboard face, so that it's purposely directing light only to where you're driving. So as you go further out, you can see how the kind of the fan area of that, it only gets shorter. So, and that's because of the way, if you look at the horizontal viewing angle, the way it's designed is the further you get to the edges, the less you can see, or the shorter the distance. And Outfront says they've never had any complaints from residential uses. This is just a diagram. I don't know why this is changing on me. To show kind of both out, the light projecting out as well as down, and where those areas are most affected. And then they'll do kind of a 3D model where you can get that impression of how far it goes. But the light level has to stop within that 250 feet. I'm trying to see if there's anything else in there. Nope. The other question was, should there be design standards? So the City of Walker sign on 196 was mentioned. This is not a sign. This is owned by a private party who put that in, and so it's not, the actual structure is not owned by Outfront. We don't have any other examples of this kind of finish on billboards that exist in the region. One of the challenges when we're thinking about this is kind of where would this apply for additional design standards. Most of the signs that would have digital, except for I think one exception, are located where the road is higher than the board base. That makes sense. So if you're thinking along 131 or even portions of 96 where you see things like, I think of like the billboard by Rockford Construction. There's one there as you're heading east. That board next to where the kind of cell phone tower stuff is, they have all the things down on the ground off of Seward. Like you don't see that from the road, but you could see it from the street, but then you're not really experiencing the billboard in the same way. So that was the big question as we were talking through kind of where would that apply and does it make sense from a regulatory standpoint? But that's up to the Planning Commission to decide. Any questions on any of those pieces before I go to the repositioning piece?
I have one. So in our discussion last time, we talked about like comparing the view shed or light shed for digital signs to what is there now. Do we know, like, is it less impact or more related to the static, like lamps or lights that are showing? I'm sorry, I'm having a
No,
really hard time
well,
articulating my questions today.
The big difference is the direction of the light, right? The current lights, they shine up and at the face, whereas with the digital, they're shining out. And so really with those diagrams, the question is, with them shining out, how much of an impact is it? I mean, there's more light than there is, I think, shining up.
Okay.
But is it enough where it's disturbing, given how much light's emitted?
Okay, thanks.
For the repositioning exchange, again, the purpose was to facilitate new development and redevelopment of properties. I think I mentioned this before, but it's specifically mentioned in the ordinance just to provide the logic for it, because this is so unusual. We think of billboards in property rights, but they're considered trade fixtures under Michigan case law, the Tax Act, and billboard industry lease language. So it's like if you have I think I mentioned, if you had like you're renting your Qdoba and you're renting from the landlord in the strip mall and you want to pick up your equipment and move it someplace else, those are trade fixtures. So kind of thinking about that kind of provided the opportunity for us to think about how do you reposition these billboard signs in a different way than being bound by the actual physical location of them. And so what's proposed is that if they're, TBA is where we have the majority of these billboards. And so how do we address the redevelopment potential in the TBA zone district so that we can facilitate this changing of location for the billboards and without burdening a development project with either expense or trying to negotiate with the billboard company to try to figure out what to do with the sign. So for TBA, you'll see it applies to all zone districts, that it could go into the TBA again, or the downtown, or the transitional city center, or the mid-century neighborhood commercial, or in TOD. So it allows for some repositioning in those zone districts. In the downtown, it could be, a downtown sign could be relocated in the downtown or TCC. Same thing with the TCC zone district and so on. The sign size, I think, is important in nearly all cases. There's probably a few exceptions, but the by far the largest sign size that's in the TBA zone district is a poster. And so the sign size is capped as a poster size for the TBA zone district. So they could do smaller if they wanted. If there was a location they wanted to take the square footage and do a smaller sign someplace that fit, they could do that. In the downtown, it's unlimited size, and I'll explain that. There's a super size option that's in there for the downtown area. And in the other cases, it would be the bulletin size that would be allowed, which is the larger sign size. And this is just an example kind of the concept we mentioned up in Creston. So being able to, just as an example, if that sign were to come down, it could be relocated onto a blank wall. Building code, if we're having zero setbacks, building code requires basically a solid wall. So you do have some opportunities to use that without really you're not covering up windows or doors. Which works well. In the ordinance also, new sign structures are not allowed. So this is really only, we're not saying you're building new posts and putting in new full facilities. It's supposed to be more nimble than that and flexible. So it allows for wall signs, but not for new post structures. So really, it's a cap and trade methodology. They can turn in a sign, get their square feet, and take that square feet and move it someplace else, kind of floating within those designated zone districts without penalty. I mentioned the building walls without new structures. And in both cases, I think I should have mentioned it before, but if there's a compelling development project and we're looking at that and Kristen says, well, I really think this billboard needs to be moved, she can, as a carrot, can offer double points. The super advertising sign that I mentioned, this is just kind of an example where you could take the existing billboards, take that square footage, and then apply it as a bigger sign size in another location within the CC zone district only. And part of that understanding, kind of, it's a larger sign, but it also, part of the mitigation for the larger sign would be to allow the applicant to contribute to a public art fund where it's spelled out. The city of Detroit has been doing this, I think successfully, to be able to provide both a benefit to the district as well as to consolidate signs and allow something different in the downtown that's unique to that. And then definitions are provided, new definitions in the ordinance, just to clarify the difference between the super, poster, bulletin, and digital. And I think that's it. So the only big question that I think we had at the end was for the digital, kind of how you wanted to look at the approval process for that. Initially, it was proposed for all special, that all digital signs were special land use. The updated version has its special land use within 300 feet, and then administrative approval outside of that. We also were approached by the industry, and they asked if the light levels with that 250 feet, kind of that range, sorry, go back to this. Helps if I go the right direction. The billboard industry has asked if it could be kind of that red circle area, and if it's only within that area, then that would be a special land use, and the rest would be administratively, it'd be possible to administratively approve those. In all cases, the planning director still reserves the right, if there's, even if it's a by right, to have an additional review by the planning commission. So I think that was the one big question from last discussion. I don't know if there's any other ones.
Yeah, so when I was going over this, one thing I thought about was kind of with the relocation program, being able to move square footage between, or in the same zone district, but not necessarily the same part of the city, like whether there was thought about implications, whether positive or negative, on like neighborhoods of focus where the majority of our billboards are right now. So I don't know, it is really a question. I don't know whether it would be a net win or like, I just maybe preventing like the over concentration of billboards in neighborhoods of focus, or encouraging more square footage to be removed from those areas that have a large concentration of them now. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I could pull the location map up. We did debate early on with looking at the map as far as, do we need to have separate zones for where you could exchange, have square footage allocation in different areas? I think based on, I mean, maybe you can ask out front, but I think based on the discussions that we had, I took some comfort in going, well, the boards that are there now are there for a reason, that they're hitting a certain population when they're driving through. They're meeting a neighborhood need from where their demand is. During the billboard exchange program, they got rid of a lot of the billboards that didn't make them money and weren't desirable from their standpoint, and that the remaining billboards that are there are ones that are serving a purpose in that geography, and it would be unlikely for it to move, kind of cluster all in one neighborhood, because it doesn't, from an economic standpoint, the signs are more valuable if they're spaced apart and they're distributed more evenly. But yeah, I struggled with that, because I was like, how does that, I don't want them all ending up in Roosevelt Park, right? I want them to be spaced around.
Is there some logic in adding more separation distances between them where you can reposition, but in no case shall it be closer than?
You could, it could be no, I think you'd have to think about it, because all the signs are, a good number of the signs are all non-conforming as far as distance goes. So it couldn't be your standard billboard separation distance we have today. I think it probably would be within a set distance, probably just a fixed number would probably be easiest.
Yeah. And it might be a good, so we had this conversation during our business meeting just about if that was an item for consideration, and I said, well, not that specifically, but that we had talked about setting a cap either on a ward or geographic location, and decided that maybe that put us more boxed in than we would even want as a city. And this approach sort of relies on this market-driven decision that we assume out front would have, and so it might be a good question to pose to them as well, to help us better understand whether there really would be any market-driven logic to have that, maybe what I would call an over-concentration in a certain business district or neighborhood.
Yeah, I could see if it's, you don't want, 2 or 3 in one block. You're talking hundreds of feet, not thousands of feet, if you were going to have some sort of spacing there, and then you would consider which way they're facing. So an east facing versus a west facing, they're treated both by the state of Michigan and even in the zoning ordinance already kind of as different signs, because you don't experience it coming the other way. So it would just be, the wording would have to be facing the same direction. And then you could do whatever you want from a block standpoint, kind of what that separation would be, because the scale is so much different than along the highway.
Could you say again the director review versus special land use? I know you said it, I just didn't quite follow.
Yeah, so kind of 3 options have been discussed as we've talked about kind of what the approval process for digital billboards would be. The super signs are special land uses. That's already written in the code. The first one is same thing for digital. It's all special land use for any digital billboard for those 10. The second option could be within a certain distance, and in this case, 300 feet was written, would be special land use if it was around that. So that would encompass kind of that where that light shed is. A more narrow definition would be just within that red bubble light shed, which is 250 feet at the greatest distance. And then, so if, for example, if you had a home behind where the billboard is facing, like if the billboard's facing out towards the highway and you have a home on a block behind it, that might be 200 feet from them, but they're not going to experience anything from the sign. So those were kind of the different variations. It doesn't matter if you say everything's special land use, but then if you want to say some are special land use and others could be director approval, similar to what's been done for electronic message centers in the neighborhoods. The nuances would be it's just a general distance from the sign for residential uses. I wouldn't say residential districts, I'd say uses. And so is it the general distance, or is it based on the light shed and whether or not they're affected?
So you're basing it on uses, not districts. Are future land uses taken into consideration if there's not residential there now, but we anticipate some mixed-use development in the future? Is that a consideration of the director or of the planning commission?
So we talked about that actually to some degree yesterday. it's kind of chicken or the egg, right? So in this case, if it's there, if that use is there before the other use, usually it's, okay, well, it is what it is how it's been approached. Certainly, I think what comes into play, though, and this is where the director review is important, is that even in the discussion yesterday, Kristen's like, well, this project is anticipated, so how would this affect that? And so she's got that perspective to be able to say, well, then maybe I'm not comfortable approving it like this, and it should go, if you were to follow the scheme of its director approval, then it has to be approved by the planning commission. So there are kind of those nuances in there. I don't know, you can speak for yourself. But, yeah.
No, that, I concur with what Suzanne just said. That was the conversation we had yesterday. I think, I struggle a little bit to suggest that one land use right or application is dependent upon future, but at the same time, we do look at future growth and development and what we anticipate. I think that especially in our core area where this seems like it would be a more material conversation, knowing that we have the ability for us as staff to say, you know what, we know that there's other things planned, that future plan character conversation. To me, that would be a logical, timeout. We're not going to proceed administratively. Now, that is wholly dependent upon probably who's sitting in this chair. So that's something to consider for the Planning Commission. But I think as staff, we've got some, I think, institutional knowledge and consistency with our approach that I think most of us would agree that if we know that there's a future plan character that could be impacted or a specific project that could be impacted and we're not sure what those outcomes would be or how those would work together, I'd be inclined to say this needs a broader conversation than just internal staff review.
Can you go back to the slide where you talked about the standards of review? So I guess my one question related to that then, if considering future land use, like how does that fit in with, like even if you were to then bring it to Planning Commission, how are we supposed to then review that against the standards for proposed here, I guess? Like if it is current use, that dictates whether it's director review or planning, yeah.
We'd be utilizing the same standards. It would just probably be a more informed, it would be a discussion versus just me looking at that, or staff, I should say, but just staff looking at it. Because typically it would become a larger conversation with community involvement. You'd have 9 minds behind it versus just 1 or 2. So I think it elevates the discussion beyond a single person or couple staff persons.
Does landscaping come up in each specific site location? If we wanted to make sure that pedestrian friendliness was occurring in and around where billboards are located, what's the mechanism for us?
We don't have anything in currently with our pole and ground signs. We do require a 200 or 300 square foot landscape island around the base of the structure. That's something that I think we could, I don't know, easily add, but that's something that could also be considered.
I know that was required when they installed the signs on 196 as you go eastbound towards the East Beltline. There's signs and there was landscaping installed, but I don't remember if that was required by ordinance or staff had to do it or they voluntarily did it. I don't remember. But it wouldn't be unusual. It's been done.
And that would apply mostly to the digital upgraded ones, right? Right.
Little green wall behind it.
Yeah. Yeah.
One other thing I'm thinking about is I don't. Feels to me like light emitting from a digital sign is not the only consideration around whether it's an appropriate spot for that sign around residences in particular, right? Like I wouldn't want to live right behind that billboard, for instance. I mean, it could. The fact is, there's this large structure, 675 square foot structure up in the air, 60 feet or whatever they are. How does that? Yeah, I guess I'm concerned about just worrying about where the light goes. There's still a structure in the air, right? And so that's not the only consideration. So how could we encompass that to think about what's all around that?
So no new structures, when we say new structure, it's replacing an existing structure that's already there at an existing location. So it's not a new pole in a new location that would affect someone. So it's been there for probably, in some cases, decades.
Yeah, so we're talking about changing a static billboard into an electronic one. So we're not changing. Okay, yeah, that
Yep,
makes
so
sense.
it's just, in most of them, the highway signs right now are that bulletin size, and it would just be taking down that static face and putting up
Replacing
the
it.
digital, right?
Yep.
And then, unless they have let's say they're I-beams, the old rusty I-beams that you see out there, and
Yep.
they need to put the monopole in to support the digital, but it's the same location.
Got it.
Any other questions at this point? Okay. And I'll open up the public hearing. If you're here today about the proposed ordinance changes, you can come forward and state your name and share your thoughts with us.
Hi, my name's Andy Jansen, and I'm with Outfront Media. First of all, we appreciate Suzanne's work and Kristen's work on this, and definitely this commission for the thoughtful discussion and conversation. But something I think a lot of people don't know is my company has been in continuous operation and located within the city of Grand Rapids for 138 years. We've been part of the city landscape since 1885. And obviously, you look out the window, you can see the city's changed quite a bit since 1885, but we've been able to maintain a presence and continue to grow and change right along with the city. And I believe that these proposed amendments are just the next evolution of that. It's thoughtful and appropriate regulation that addresses the goals of the city while also addressing the needs of the industry. I believe these rules create flexibility for the city and the industry that hasn't previously existed. It'll allow us to be more nimble and to more closely align our collective goals with both the industry and the city. I love all the new development and all the happenings within the city. And this proposed language will create an environment where we can be more partners instead of adversaries. We can support development instead of being an impediment to it. For my entire career, I've tried to create partnerships. I can tell you it's much more enjoyable to come into these rooms and these meetings when we can have collaborative discussions and we can have solutions together rather than being at odds with each other. I believe these proposed regulations will help foster that collaborative environment and create opportunities and solutions that we will all benefit from. If you can't tell, we're in support of this, and we appreciate all your work on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, I'll close the public hearing.
Oh, sure.
Any other discussion? Did something just come up?
I don't know how to word what I'm going to say.
Andy or Denise, I'm wondering if you could come back up and your perspective about kind of that concentration of if all the billboards on Plainfield were to be relocated or were to be removed, would you relocate them to our neighborhoods of focus or other areas that have seen less investment? Maybe a little bit better understanding of your market approach?
Sure, that's a great question. Good afternoon, everybody. Denise Bartholomew. I also work in the real estate department with Outfront Media. Been in my chair for about 12 years here in the city, so been part of the old exchange program, seen the development and the evolution of our industry within that time. And certainly, as Andy had mentioned, we want to be a partner and be able to help work with the continued evolution of the city. So the question was based on concentration of signage. And when we originally looked at the map that Suzanne has prepared, it really does lend to the fact that Andy spoke to, that we've been in the city for 138 years. Many, many, many of these signs are older than any of us in this room. And it's just because they were developed and placed way before regulations were what they are today. So every single sign, to the best of our knowledge, is grandfathered non-conforming to some degree for some reason or the other. And we're okay with that. We're not proposing to add more signage. We don't want that. And just to talk about the concentration and density, if you look at arteries like Division and so on, where there was a historical high concentration of signs, that's really not good for us. We don't want advertisers competing for attention of the other in that same concentrated space. It's much better for us to have a diverse, broad coverage to reach various audiences across the city versus concentrate signage all into one given area. That's really where, over the course of the state, really, the state has a cap and replace program. We've taken down billboards in that over-concentrated area. And just to give some perspective on the history of why some signs were developed in that manner long before any of our time here, there never used to be spacing regulations, whether at the state level and a lot of times municipal levels as well. So that's what gave that perception in the 60s and 70s, that Burma shave, sign, 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 sign. The industry over time learned that that's not a good thing for us. It really takes away the audience and the attention and the effectiveness of that messaging. So as far as our desire to ever bring something like that back, that's a disadvantage to us and to our clients that use us. We don't want an oversaturated area. It's much better to be able to have that map in more of a scattered perspective versus anywhere concentrated all in one area, if that answers your question.
Thanks, Denise.
All right, any other questions or discussion? Jeff, go ahead.
I think my question is for Suzanne, but maybe Denise as well. When you were talking about the ability to float a billboard between, something occurred to me when you said that. I'm just wondering about timing. Because if there's a willingness from the billboard from out front to say, okay, we're going to remove our billboard, but they haven't quite secured a location. I'm wondering, do we need to put in a timeline to say that they've got, 30 days for that billboard? Because it could be that we want that billboard down sooner than later based on the project, but maybe they haven't secured a new location within, I'm just wondering whether there could be like, I don't even know what it would be, like a 30-day or a 3-month grace period to say you've got those rights versus banking them so that I don't know if I'm making sense. The rights stay alive.
Well, so the way the ordinance is written right now is that they can bank them, like they do right now
Yeah.
today with the billboard exchange program.
They can bank them, but then they couldn't take it and add a new billboard in a different location, right?
So there's two pieces. One is the digital billboards upgrade eligibility zone, which is the highway
Yeah.
pieces. So then this is the square footage in the mixed-use commercial zone districts. It allows them to place a new sign in a location, just they're moving those square footage pieces, but they could bank them. So like that example where
Okay.
they had the 3 billboards that were, it's like if we go back to that John Bell Zoo example. So they may not simultaneously take down two bulletins and a poster to be able to get to the supersized sign.
Okay.
So the
There's no-
thought was that they could bank them and then reallocate them when they
Okay.
have a lease in hand in an appropriate location.
Okay. I was just thinking with the repositioning, I was thinking that they couldn't put one back up unless it was like an immediate transaction. That was my concern.
Oh, that's not how it's worded. The
Okay.
thinking was banking, so that they could.
Reposition it when they secured a new location.
Yeah.
So we'd be banking both credits and their area.
Yes.
Yes.
So then,
Well, the zone district in which they're taken, they're cashed in. So if it's in the TBA and they put those credits into the bank, it could be used in any one of the zone districts. But if it's, it doesn't work the other way around. So if it's in the MCNC zone district and they take it out, they can't take those credits and use them in the TBA.
right, but, so you could use the credits to upgrade for a digital billboard.
Yep.
For a digital billboard upgrade.
Yep.
So then, let's say you needed 3, and so, that would wipe out the credits and the associated area, okay?
Yep.
So alternatively, you could do the relocation, okay? Let's say you have 3 credits and X number of square feet. Like there, I think what you would get, probably 2, 4, 5 credits, right?
Yep.
Okay, so then they could use part of that area on something and also use credits for something. It could be split up, right? Because that's the way a bank works. They can withdraw credits, or they can withdraw square footage.
Yes.
Yes.
As long as it's being kept track of so that it's not double dipping.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's exactly what I'm getting
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
So
There's-
those things will need to be tracked.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's probably our next step, Elizabeth, is to try to figure out administratively how we probably revise that spreadsheet and maybe something more robust than an Excel spreadsheet to be able to track. So,
Excuse me, Kristen, if I may speak to the concept of timing and from an industry perspective. As far as the timing goes right now, as the existing program stands, we're able to put credits into that bank. And from the business side of this, there are additional considerations that we need to look at. And we don't want to ever make a rush decision. We want to give relocation in any concept thoughtful consideration, and is that location appropriate, not only for us and our advertisers, but for the city landscape. So they're really, to have the timing to be able to do that right is a good thing. And I think as far as this program goes versus what's been in place for over the last decade, this gives us as an industry more motivation to not dig our heels in, to say, okay, if we remove a sign, there's something of value that we can eventually get for that in the right place, in the right setting, in the right position. So rather than have to hold up, because we haven't been able to really replace any of our signage in a long time, this gives us the flexibility to be able to keep the coverage for our audience, or for our advertisers that want to reach those audiences. That's really the goal of Andy and I in our roles, is to be able to keep a product on the shelf, so to speak, to be able to enable the businesses and the nonprofits, most of which are local to regional businesses that use us, to reach the west side, to reach the southeast side, to reach the various areas of the city. So as far as being able to do that, we've never had the ability to maintain that coverage. It's always just been take down, and then anything that was taken down was gone for good or given credit towards the previous upgrades. This now, as far as timing goes, it's really a mechanism to speed up and get rid of impediments to redevelopment that didn't exist prior.
yeah, thank you. And please know I wasn't trying to suggest a timeline was needed. I was making sure that we didn't inadvertently have a clock ticking when credits went into the bank that then we couldn't reposition it elsewhere. I wanted to make sure that we all had time to evaluate a new location that was better served for both your purposes but also city development.
Same page, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or discussion on the proposed changes?
Some discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have some decisions to make, right, related to what we want to be special land use versus director review.
Yeah, I mean, as it currently is written, any digital billboard that is within 300 feet of a residential zone district would require planning commission approval. If it's outside that 300-foot mark, then it could be director review. What's being suggested today is rather than focus on a specific dimension, that it be tied to that area of influence that was on the map earlier, the 0.3 foot candles, which earlier I was a little bit nervous about whether an adjustment could be made with a condition, but I think it's more simple than I'd initially anticipated. So I would just need a decision point. Are you comfortable with the ordinance as is with that 300-foot dimension? Or do you feel that tying it to the area of impact, if you will, is a better measurement to use. And if you feel that way, I think that's a relatively simple adjustment in the ordinance that we could make before it goes to city commission.
I have a question. Can you, is my mic on?
Yeah.
About that radius and who, I understand it's an engineering model, for lack of a better term. But is that coming internally from the company, or is that an outsourced mechanism?
Yep, so I'm trying to get to that slide very slowly. Okay, here it is. So it would be a lighting engineer that would be required to, that would be employed by Outfront and/or a subconsultant. If it's an engineer, they have a seal, is that correct?
They're a certified lighting engineer.
Yeah, and so not unlike development projects that submit surveys, they are still required to be sealed by a professional architect or engineer. And historically, we don't have issues with it being, doctored or just,
Yeah, that makes me much more
Self-motivated.
comfortable. Yes. Nope, that's fine. That was just my,
yeah.
My
Most
big
engineers
concern
don't
with
like to
that.
stamp things if they don't mean it right.
right.
Paul?
Heard that. Heard that.
So I guess, what do we think about that?
I mean, as long as, with, with that information, I'm comfortable with looking at it from that lighting perspective and what that's proposing, rather than the 300-foot radius. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I would be too. How does the new wall sign, like the example of the downtown wall sign on the parking garage, how would that would always be static?
Yes.
Okay.
The zoo sign that you saw?
Right,
Which
yeah.
are- Yeah.
So that's the only thing we're talking about here that could be new sign placement is a wall-mounted sign on an existing structure, right?
The supersize concept are new, yes. I mean, if you reposition them, going back to.
Yeah, the one on Creston there, on the library, the repositioning, but
Yeah,
the only new sign locations we're discussing here in general is wall-mounted on a structure, correct? And those signs would all be static signs.
yes.
Yeah.
I think it's looking at it both ways, both by the credit system. So this strategy does not increase the number of signs. So this would effectively say, we accept that the number of billboards we have today are the number of billboards we have tomorrow. So if we have 10
Right.
billboards today, we will have maximum 10 tomorrow. But the way in which we can disperse either the square footage or the credit system is why we would see billboards in different locations than what we have today.
Okay.
Did I say that correctly, Suzanne?
Yeah, for the square footage, so for the digital signs, you only will get them on the highways, and there's a cap of 10. And with those directional requirements, 3 facing south, 3 facing north, 2 east, 2 west.
Yeah.
And then for the exchange, this repositioning piece, you would have new signs, but you would not have any increase in the number of them.
Would
So
we-
it's cap and trade.
Would it potentially be a new pedestal?
No,
Okay.
Only
So
wall signs.
The repositioning would be only on wall signs, and they would only be static because the LEDs are only along the highways with the, yeah.
correct.
Yeah, okay. Then I would agree. I'm comfortable with the modification to allow for the, staff review when it's only with, when it's, I don't remember how it was worded, but when the light display is affecting something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I am too, and I appreciate the super sign stuff will always be special land use, so we'll always see that. And that the kind of the square footage of ad space isn't increasing. I appreciate the discussion about kind of market-driven aspects that will not result in, or shouldn't result in an overconcentration in any one neighborhood. There's one other thing I was going to say, and I don't remember. I don't know, come back to me.
So I've heard, I think, 2 modifications to the ordinance in front of you. The first of which is that we'd update the ordinance to require planning commission approval when digital billboards are when residential uses are within the area of impact, which is greater than 0.3 foot candles. And then all other digital billboards could be approved by using director review. And then the second is that a landscape island be required for each digital billboard.
I remembered what I was going to say. Oh, I just appreciated the conversation and clarification regarding kind of the dual credit and square footage to make sure that we have a system in place so that all of that is tied together so that you can't both cash in credits and square footage for the same sign in different places.
Did you have something you wanted to add? Yeah, go ahead.
With potential landscape requirements, we don't necessarily have rights to add landscaping to a property. Where we have a billboard, or there might not be appropriate area, say it's in the middle of a parking lot, the pole is there. As far as landscaping requirements, I don't know that we necessarily have the rights to add landscaping to somebody else's property through this process. Just something to consider. I don't know how that would work.
Yeah, I was going to actually say the same. I mean, I think there are many, if we're only talking about 10 locations on the highway, there's many of those where landscaping would be inappropriate, probably, and not make sense. So I don't know how we'd adjust for that, but.
I'm not a lawyer at all, but isn't there something like an easement? Don't the billboard people get an easement on the land?
They'd only get what the property owner gives them. So as the gentleman said, there's no way for them to guarantee what they're going to get.
Meaning they may not have authority within the easement to do landscaping or other site
Correct.
improvements.
And they would only have the rights that are given to them by the property owner. Yep.
Correct. Many of these billboards, especially along, are concentrated in more of an industrial area. So for example, we may be in just outside of the thruway for where trucks are coming. And we're okay as is now with just that pole that's typically about 36 inches in diameter. If we look at additional landscaping requirements around that, they may take up additional parking spots. The landowner might not want that. So when all those locations went in, and Suzanne, maybe you can correct me, or Andy, on 196, when the ordinance was amended to allow those were truly new locations on the property. So all of that at that time was agreed to with the property owner as a new sign. These are existing locations. The property use is already established with the billboard there as is. That's not going to change. So I don't know that it would be a practical requirement for the landowner or the industry, or a good requirement to add that, especially given the nature of these, where most often they're not pedestrian-oriented locations where these columns are located.
Or you have the railroad.
Railroad, yes. We also have railroad locations where we're on railroad property and may be prohibited by the railroad to do something like that due to their operations and so on.
So unlike pole signs and ground signs, there's a layer of complexity here because of property rights, leases, whereas the pole and the ground sign, there's maybe a different relationship between the property owner and the individual looking to have the business. So it might be more challenging. Well, it sounds like it would be a lot more challenging in this case.
I have a question, Denise. What percent of your signs are through leases rather than fee simple ownership of the land?
A large majority. As far as the exact count, I couldn't rattle off the top of my head, but I would say probably close to upwards of 90% are leases.
It might be sufficient for me to change 4F, which describes the things that are supposed to be considered by the planning director and the planning commission, to include the pedestrian experience. Because it covers the area, height, placement, proximity of repositioned. And I acknowledge most of the time these are going to be on a wall. But I can't quite get my head around all the possible circumstances. So to me, if we just added the pedestrian experience into the list of things that is to be considered, I could be comfortable with that. 4F, 1, 2, and 3.
Another thing that I've been thinking about with the super-sized signs, these big downtown signs, I see a contribution to the GR Mural Fund. Who's responsible for that fund? Is that the city commission? Is that the art?
Well, it would be a newly created fund. It would have to be a newly created fund. I would assume it would be either the Arts Advisory Committee, who does have a role in reviewing murals. That would be something that we'd have to work with the executive office on.
My concern is that while they might get some funding to put up new murals, I think in the last presentation we saw, the rendering showed a supersized sign over an existing mural in downtown, where there is currently a mural, or there has been several murals that have kind of rotated over the years. And I'm concerned if the commission, the council, whatever you mentioned there, they don't have some say in the relocation of, or the location of these supersized signs, if they might just get displaced and get paid to then maybe put one somewhere that it's less visible and might actually detract from the art vibrancy in the city.
Something for us to consider during special land use discussions, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the way it's written currently would be working with the DDA and/or the CIAs to look at utilizing or dispersing those funds, because we want to make sure that they can be dispersed around the city, not just downtown too.
And this is a voluntary contribution, not related to like cashing in square feet or in lieu of, or, okay. Confusing to me too. Okay. Just reread it. I guess what's the incentive for folks to contribute to this fund?
Suzanne?
The way that ordinance is written is a mitigation measure. So as you're going through special land use, you're looking at the effect of the sign on the surrounding area. And I think it's also, a discussion when it goes up and how that works.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, and I think I know the answer to this, but we cannot consider, correct me if I'm wrong, what the content is on these signs, correct?
Correct.
Where you would have control is if it was on city property and part of the lease agreement. So the private property owner could say, I don't want alcohol advertised or whatever. So like in this case, if it was allowed to go on the city parking ramp, the city could put those stipulations in.
And we currently have a policy for advertisement on city property. I don't remember all the details or limitations of it, but one does exist.
I don't either.
Yeah.
And then I have one other kind of more of a operational question for us, is going back to that conversation about proposed use, possible use on an adjoining property. Often when projects come in front of us, we have to take a step back and say, all right, we can't really think ahead here. We have to deal with what's happening right now. So is that going to, again, be part of our consideration as a land use, or?
Yeah, you do have within your standards, you have the ability to consider the future planned character of the area.
Okay, all right, so looking at more of a, not, right next door, they're thinking about
Yeah.
building this thing there, and this sign wouldn't, so this sign wouldn't work there. So we
Yeah.
can't really,
I think it's but one standard, and so you'd look at the geographic area, and assuming we got plans in place that were maybe descriptive, and we talk about this with alcohol uses and with
Sure.
noise and such. We say, we want the future plan characters to create a mixed-use environment. So allowing these outdoor the live entertainment at the bar to go until 2 a.m. is probably counter to the future plan character, which is a healthy, vibrant, mixed-use residential district. So those are the kinds of the ways to look at this as well, is what is that future plan character?
okay, all right, thanks.
All right, any other discussion, things we need to weigh in on? Okay, would someone be willing to make a motion then?
To do it. All right, here we go. I gotta scroll to it.
Page 72.
Yes, thank you. All right, now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission recommends that City Commission approve the proposed text amendments to the zoning ordinance for the following reasons. The proposed amendments are consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance because the amendments are consistent with several of the goals of the 2002 master plan, including vital business districts, goal number 5, improve the visual appeal and walkability of all business districts, a strong economy, goal number 7, encourage business investment while balancing economic growth with priorities for neighborhoods, the natural environment, and the quality of the built environment, a city that enriches our lives, goal number 6, emphasize urban design quality and placemaking. And the zoning ordinance recognizes the need for safe, well-maintained, vibrant, and attractive residential and business neighborhoods while accommodating the need for signs to function for the purpose for which they are intended. The proposed amendments will allow for off-premises signage to be relocated and upgraded in a manner which meets the purpose and intent of Article 15 signs. The proposed amendments will enhance the functionality or character of the future development in the city because the amendments offer a means by which off-premises signage can be legally removed and relocated, eliminating the impediment to development created by long-term leases for off-premises signs. The repositioning, exchange, and allowance for upgrades to digital billboards in select locations provides an incentive to move off-premises signage that could otherwise be a roadblock to site development or redevelopment. The proposed amendments will protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the public because the proposed text amendments allow for the thoughtful repositioning of off-premises signage in select zone districts in the city. Digital off-premises signs will comply with all federal and state regulations which target potential nuisance and safety impacts of digital signs, and additional regulations have been put in place to ensure the impact to neighboring properties is mitigated. The proposed amendments are needed to correct an error or omission in the original text because the initial billboards exchange program of 2008 was successful but has run its course. These text amendments build upon the success of the program by offering additional incentives for billboard removal and relocation. The proposed amendments will address the community need in physical or economic conditions or development practices because under current zoning, the owner of off-premises signage has little to no incentive to move a sign if it is impeding development because once it is removed, it cannot be erected elsewhere. The relocation exchange program allows off-premises signage to be carefully relocated within a district, removing a roadblock to development. Additionally, the amendments will allow signs to be modernized, improving the visual appearance of signs, and support structures to the benefit of all who view them. The proposed amendments would not result in the creation of significant nonconformities in the city because most, if not all, of the off-premises signs presently located in the city of Grand Rapids are nonconforming due to spacing requirements or location in zone districts that no longer permit off-premises signage. And the proposed amendments will allow for the reduction of nonconforming off-premises signage in the city of Grand Rapids. For signs to be upgraded to digital, other sign faces will have to be removed, reducing the overall number of nonconforming off-premises signs in the city. Did you have a condition related to the, do we have to say anything about the amendment or our modifications? Yeah.
That the proposed ordinance be modified to require planning commission approval only when residential uses fall within lighting levels greater than 0.3 foot candles cast by digital billboard signs.
I will incorporate that. That concludes my motion.
You also had the amendment for the pedestrian experience to 4F.
Yes.
Thank you, yep. Oh, Paul, I'm not on that section.
4 under the repositioning.
That the pedestrian experience be considered or added as part of the review
part of it, yeah.
standards and the relocation program for F in the ordinance. Carol will make that sound great.
I'll support.
All right, any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. I'll open up the public comment portion of the meeting. See no public comment. I'll close that. Any other business, commissioners or staff?
One announcement that Salim has submitted his letter of resignation to the Planning Commission. So I believe his last meeting is next meeting. He won't be at July, oh, I'm sorry. The June 22nd.
last meeting? Unlike Commissioner Beeler, who abandoned us without showing up to their last meeting.
Stated for the record.
For the record.
Sorry if you're listening.
So the letter has been submitted, and I'm sure the mayor and Committee on Appointments are working hard to fill that position, and I will update as soon as possible. But if you know anybody interested, please put the word out there.
Do you know what ward he's in?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Sorry.
I can't remember if it's second or third.
I think it's mine, right?
Is it?
Third?
Second?
Second? Okay. Okay. Anything else? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.